Today I'm going to show you why CONMEBOL should never be allowed to host another tournament ever again. CONMEBOL typically controls all sales for Copa America. However, this year they decided to put the responsibilities on the stadiums, but more importantly, their partners, resale markets. And because all these markets only care about is revenue, this turned into a shit show really quickly. According to TickPick, the average purchase price for a group stage game was $187, up 61% from 2016, and tickets for the final ranged around $1,300 to $7,000.
I beg your pardon?
Keep in mind, my friend got a ticket to the Euro final for only 800 euros. And this was last minute. Also, remember, this is just the price for the ticket. If you live within the city, you'll more than likely have to pay $40 to $50 in parking, and anyone abroad will still have to figure out the exorbitant fees for flights and accommodation. And because the US is car-centric, you have to throw in the Uber prices too, and those aren't cheap at all. According to one Reddit user, in order to sit in the lower tier for USA Panama, you'd have to pay more than $150. They also mentioned how some tickets in the middle of the stadium were nearly $800. This was a group stage game, by the way. This was the case for every game. It resulted in fans being priced out and stadiums barely being filled. Peru-Chile, a historic rivalry, only saw 53% of its seats filled. Ecuador versus Venezuela, even worse, 43%. Ecuador versus Jamaica, one of the worst, 37%. USA-Bolivia, which was the host's opening match of the tournament, saw just 59%. Uruguay-Panama, 44%. Uruguay-Bolivia, 58%. Colombia versus Costa Rica, 38%. And worst of all, the third place playoff in Charlotte, just 32%. Which makes sense considering the tickets for the upper tier were $125. So much for growing the game, guys. I can't stress this enough though, it won't be this bad for the World Cup. FIFA does its own lottery system thing. I don't know the entire process. All I know is it won't be a complete shit show like this. A big issue that needed to be tackled before the tournament was the pitch conditions, because most stadiums being used for this tournament also housed other sports on artificial turf. And artificial turf usually increases the risk of injury, especially more serious ones like Achilles injuries. So CONMEBOL had a plan to make sure any artificial surface would have a grass surface installed over it. A pretty solid plan, but unfortunately, this is CONMEBOL we're talking about, so the installations didn't happen until days before the matches. And as a consequence, the conditions for every match were terrible. After the tournament opener, Argentina head coach Lionel Scaloni was furious, citing the organizers had 7 months to prepare. CONMEBOL saw it differently, however, claiming the pitches had been tested thoroughly and were no threat to players' well-beings. But all this rebuttal did was further frustrate players and managers, especially Marcelo Bielsa, whose rant made Lionel Scaloni look like a Buddhist monk in comparison.
Y señalar a los árbitros y decir que las canchas están perfectas y todas las mentiras que han dicho acá y hacer conferencia de prensa para decir no, las canchas están perfectas y vos ves que las uniones no justifican, no, los campos de entrenamiento están perfectos y Bolivia no entrenó y yo tengo todas las fotos que justifican que son todas mentiras. Esto es una plaga de mentirosos y nosotros hablamos. Y ya dije todo lo que me prometí no decir. Y nosotros hablamos diciendo, no, porque esto es una amenaza, ya van a ver. Scaloni habló una vez, se atrevió a decir que las uniones, si usted ve aparte de esto, son todos errores sabidos. Los norteamericanos no te dicen te doy una cancha perfecta, te dicen te doy una cancha instalada hace 3 días atrás. O X cantidad de días, y las uniones no cierran. Busca una jugada del partido de ayer en el área chica de Rochet y va a ver que la pelota hace tac-tac. Y las uniones no cierran, y los campos de entrenamiento eran un desastre. Y Bolivia no entrenó, claro, Bolivia.
8 of the stadiums used for Copa America will be used again in the World Cup, but ideally, FIFA will be more uptight in making sure these pitches are match ready. CONMEBOL has shown us many, many times that their officiating is god-awful. And VAR? It's not helped one bit. So it was more of an expectation that throughout this tournament there would be bonehead decisions and awful calls. For instance, in the USA-Uruguay match, an official allowed play to restart and then booked someone immediately after. In the rules, it clearly states that play must stop once a card is being issued, and this also nearly led to an Uruguay goal. During a match between Canada and Chile, Moise Bombito elbowed a player and only got a yellow for it. Then just 20 minutes later, Chile were down to 10 men after a very soft second yellow card. Days later, the Chilean Federation would complain about this. Finally, in the Brazil vs Colombia game, a penalty was denied for Brazil. CONMEBOL later acknowledged a mistake was made, but the damage was already done because just 6 minutes after the mistake, Colombia scored the equalizer. Not even the best comedian could come up with comedy like this. In general though, the officials seem to just have no concept of management whatsoever, because halftime breaks seem to be dictated more by the players and the coaches than the officiating team for whatever reason. In the tournament opener, Argentina's squad were 10 minutes late for the second half. Lionel Scaloni was banned for one match as consequence. Mexico also pulled this cheap trick as well, but they didn't suffer any match bans. Marcelo Bielsa did, however, after his team was 90 seconds late twice. But it is a bit ironic punishing these coaches when it was entirely your fault in the first place. Within the first 2 weeks of the tournament, there were 3 different statements from CONMEBOL condemning racism, which is pretty on brand for South America, to be fair. The first incident happened after the opening match when Moise Bombito received racist messages because of his tackle on Lionel Messi. A few days later, after the US lost to Panama, both Chris Richards and Fullerin Balogun were sent discriminatory messages. And then after a heated match between Canada and Chile, Alphonso Davies received racist abuse on his Instagram posts. And of course, you can't forget about the Argentina bus incident that has probably started a race war at Chelsea. And quite honestly, there were probably a bunch of other incidents I missed. July 10th was a big day for the city of Charlotte, North Carolina, because for the first time ever, a Copa America match was coming to town. But not just any match, a semi-final. Uruguay vs Colombia. Today was the day that Charlotte finally put themselves on the footballing map. And CONMEBOL absolutely fucked it. Because this shitty organization didn't bother to surround Uruguayan players' family members with security, you had drunk Colombian fans with free reign attacking them after the final whistle. Seeing this from afar, both Ronald Araujo and Darwin Nunez reacted quickly by jumping into the stands and protecting their family members because, again, there was barely any security. So now in the middle of a crowd, there's just a massive brawl happening, and it was probably wise to hold Darwin back because he was 100% seeing red. Once the smoke cleared, however, all you could see were Uruguayan players consoling their children after a very scary moment. Security was lacking, but even worse, the response to all of this was delayed. CONMEBOL should be very thankful that no one got seriously injured in this, and hopefully they learned a lesson. A couple hours before the Copa America final between Colombia and Argentina, a bunch of ticketless fans breached the gates. Security was outnumbered and overwhelmed by the storm of fans running into the stadium, and in response, all gates at the stadium were closed. So now you had thousands of fans in the hot and hellish weather of Florida pushing against closed gates. And because this was in a small space in relation to how big these crowds were, people started getting crushed. However, to alleviate the crowd, one gate would open and close from time to time to let in a small amount of people. But that only made things worse because those who didn't have a ticket would do all they could to push into an open gate. And that chaos only made the crush worse. And I cannot stress to you how terrifying it is to be in the middle of a crowd crush. For one, you can't move on your own. In fact, your body is basically being moved by the crowd involuntarily. And as the crush gets worse, people start getting pressed against each other and desperately gasping for every bit of air before inevitably passing out. For many people, that could have been the last time they saw lights, but thankfully no one who passed out got trampled. In this crowd, you had so many excited to watch a spectacle and enjoy a nice day out with family and friends. Instead, though, they found themselves drenched in sweat, tears, and blood, having just escaped death. There were hundreds of young kids excited to see idols that were actively inspiring them. But instead, they were crying, having not a clue what was going on as their parents risked their own lives to protect them. Once some fans got into the stadium, they were more worried about seeking medical attention and water than finding their own seats. Again, CONMEBOL should be thanking the heavens that there's no blood on their hands. Not only was there a lack of security, but said security had no experience in controlling a crowd, and Quite honestly, that's the most dangerous part about all of this. Because oftentimes, a big factor that worsens crowd crushes is actually inexperienced security officers making the wrong decisions. They assume that the crowd is being voluntarily dangerous and start taking actions that only make things worse. Some said police even threatened them with tear gas, which is like the #1 thing you don't do in a closed space. Just look at Kanjuruhan in 2022. But it was pretty evident that these guys had no idea what the fuck they were doing. All they did was control the fronts when the pushing is actually coming from the back. So you're having people being pushed away from the front and people pushing from the back, only making things worse. So with no other option because of CONMEBOL's negligence, gates were open to alleviate the crowd crush. No tickets were checked, and to make things more dangerous, no one was patted down. Remember, we're in the US of A. And then once there was no longer a crush and the stadium was filled, all the gates closed, and they would never reopen again. That didn't seem to stop some though, as this video shows fans entering the fucking ventilation system to sneak into the stadium. But with the stadium full and gates not reopening, it left numerous people who had paid thousands for tickets to be locked out. Complete and utter disaster. Again though, I can't stress this enough, this shouldn't be a problem for the World Cup. I'll admit it's very easy to dunk on the US and there are plenty of problems that we have, but this is not one of them. I mean, for one, we also saw a breach before the Euro 2020 final. And also, I fully believe that FIFA, for how full of shit they are, would not allow their reputation to be ruined this way. Corruption, sports washing, they couldn't care less because, let's be honest, most people don't care about that because it doesn't affect them. But the moment fan safety becomes a concern, something that the majority of people care about, FIFA can't allow that. But going back to CONMEBOL, they should be ashamed of themselves for their negligence throughout this entire tournament. Again, it is a miracle that no one died, but that doesn't mean we should just let CONMEBOL off the hook. Because if things don't change, this organization should never, and I mean seriously, never host another tournament ever again. So yeah, there were a lot of controversies in this tournament, as you can see, so I just kind of felt like putting them all together because I didn't really follow the tournament that much and it was a nice little learning experience, I guess. Would love to know what you guys think, and of course, a massive shout out to all our members, including Janos Barash, Brazilian Fury, Respect to Jeff, Othman JN, Habakkuk, Anazir Makalankam, Alex Rod, Ulta, Miguel Munoz, Return Fire, Rory Burns, Slider Kid, Snifrix, Taco Okafan, The Cipriel 35, Not Windows 95 Man, Kentra Agacha, Big Boars the Baby Eater II, Kerbo, Unkwell, St. Terrence, Sylvia Citrus, Ryan Jens, Wise Orange, Rashford Enthusiast, Cocosaurus Rex, LeJames Braun, Samu, Just MRC, Cheesebait, Cooper Rory, The Somali Pirate, Claymore Roomba, Winder Gel, M4 Does Stuff, Finn Likes Rugby More, Davox, The Porter Geyser, TPSK25, Polar Protos, Van Fan, Lucien Von Croix, Ethan Bennett Loves Kavicha, Gazegos Breshkiewicz, Mano Tango Fei, Adrian, Chris Visconti, Dominic Griffin, Kyler Krebs, Mohammed El Tanib, Niche, Patrick Barley, Raspberry God 5, Raspberry Ale, subscribe to Tendy Tim, and Unbroken Persona. If you'd like to become a member, there'll be a link down below and up in the annotations. You can follow my Twitter if you want, follow my Instagram if you like. I'm back home, I'm going to be streaming a bit more, so follow my Twitch. But until then, I'll see you guys.